I've seen a lot of confusion lately about what the Darklands actually are and what's in them. So for the sake of clearing that up, and because it sounds like a fun thing to do, in this video I'll be discussing the geography and content of the Darklands. Let's begin by talking about the real-world influences of the Darklands. The Warhammer world is clearly based off the real world. So what part of the world is the Darklands based off? I don't think we have a 100% confirmation on exactly what it's based off, but we can probably make some educated guesses. So here's my take. Let's start in the west with the World Edge Mountains. I've heard multiple people claim that these do not have a real-world equivalent, and that's just dumb. The World Edge Mountains are blatantly based on the Ural Mountains. Not only do they have a similar shape and geographical position, the Ural Mountains literally functions as the border that separates Europe from Asia, just like the World Edge Mountains separates the Old World from the Darklands. To old Europeans, it would feel pretty close to the edge of the world. It may be a bit of a stretch, but I would also propose that the Sour Sea is the Warhammer equivalent of the Caspian Sea, or even the Black Sea, one of the two. To the east of the Darklands, we have the Mountains of Morn, home of the Ogres. I don't think anyone would disagree with just calling these the Himalayas of the Warhammer world, because that is obviously what they are. The position of Ind, or India, in the south, the steppes to the north, and the general shape of the mountains, if you include the Tibetan Plateau, all point to these mountains just being the Himalayas. Now for the Darklands itself. With the two mountain ranges I just discussed, we get a region in between them. Is this the Darklands then? Well, kind of. Let's take a quick look at the Chaos Dwarfs, or Dawi-Zharr. The Dawi-Zharr are the dominant power in the Darklands, which also makes them the dominant culture. This is relevant because the Dawi-Zharr have some obvious cultural influences taken from the real world, namely Babylonia, Sumer, and just Mesopotamia in general. The Dawi-Zharr aesthetic matches that of these influences. Even their worship of Hasut has similarities to other bull deities from around that region. And the importance of fire mirrors Zoroastrianism, which was the dominant religion in this region until the emergence of Islam. Okay, so now we place them in the real world, but it doesn't really match up too well. A lot of the Warhammer world is squished when compared to the real world, and I think that's the case here. The Darklands are not Arabic, which mirrors the ancient world's version of these regions. So let's cut off the Arabian part of the Middle East and put it right here in Morocco. Boom, there's Arabic. Now let's take the relevant regions and just squish them up here, link the Caucasus Mountains with the Urals, shrink the Caspian Sea, and we're left with something resembling the Darklands. At least that's what I figure. Let's take an overview of the history of the Darklands. The earliest event we know of is the arrival of the dwarfs to the region. They first arrived in Zorn Uskal, and from there moved into the Mountains of Morn, where they established several holds. We know the names of a couple of these: Karagbrag, Karagasorn, and Karakarakaten. This all happened sometime before minus 5600 IC, when the Great Catastrophe occurred. It was the coming of chaos that caused a schism between the Western and Eastern Dwarves. The Eastern Dwarves would eventually become known as the Dawi-Zharr. The Great Ziggurat, Mingol Sarnagarund, was constructed by the Dawi-Zharr around minus 2700 IC. Soon after, in minus 2600 IC, the enslaving of greenskins that the Dawi-Zharr would come to be known for began. It's important to note that at this time, the Darklands were not particularly, well, dark. What would become known as the Darklands were at this time a roving green plain. At the height of their power, the Nekaharan Empire extended into the Darklands. The region that is now known as the Plain of Bones was referred to by the Nekaharans as the Plains of Plenty, signifying just how different the Darklands were at the time. This would all change in minus 1500 IC with the eruption of Asgore and the nearby Ash Ridge Mountains. The eruption of Asgore was so powerful that it blew the entire mountain apart. The detonation was so loud that it was heard all the way in distant Bretonnia. This is the event that would change the Darklands forever and transform it into the ash-covered wasteland we see today. The eruption of Asgore was just one of a series of geological disasters. It was this same event that ruined much of Karaz-Ankor and brought about the time of woes for the Dawi. The origin of the event is somewhat disputed. It was either caused by a Slan mage named Lord Quek as a result of his realignment of the continents, or by the Skaven of Skavenblight as a powerful warpstone device of theirs failed and sent shockwaves across the mountains of the world. Either or both of these events could be true. Regardless of the culprit, this event had rendered the Darklands almost completely inhospitable. The volcanic activity triggered a mass migration out of the Darklands westward through the World Edge Mountains. The bulk of this mass migration seems to have been greenskins. The Darklands is generally agreed upon as the homeland of the greenskins, at least up until this point. Their hostile migration west is what shattered the Dwarven Empire forever in a conflict known as the Goblin Wars. But the greenskins weren't the only ones who migrated en masse to the west. It seems like the Darklands was also homeland to many primitive human tribes, including the ancient Tutagen and Umbergen tribes. The desperate human tribes did not fall upon the dwarves like the greenskins did. Instead, they apparently paid for their passage through the mountains. This appears to be where many, if not most, of the humans that would eventually form the empire originate from. It is noted that these humans only had bronze weapons and chariots, which proved inferior to the greenskins' iron weapon and armor. It is suggested and likely that the greenskins had learned the art of ironworking from the Dawi-Zharr. In minus 315 IC, the goblin-occupied Crookback Mountain is overrun by Skaven and is claimed by Clan Rictus, who becomes the dominant Skaven clan in the Darklands. In minus 150 IC, the Dawi-Zharr creates the Black Orc race through experimentation. 50 years later, in minus 100 IC, the Dawi-Zharr suffers a great rebellion in Sarnagarund, spearheaded by their own creations, the Black Orcs. The rebellion is quashed with the help of traitorous hobgoblins, solidifying their role as the Dawi-Zharr's lackeys. While the rebellion itself is unsuccessful, this event leads to Black Orcs escaping into the wild and becoming the backbone of many greenskin hordes. In 1000 IC, the underground canal linking Sarnagarund to the Sea of Chaos is built. With the basic history of the region out of the way, let's talk about the notable landmarks and places in the Darklands. Let's start in the north and make our way down. We'll begin with Zorn Uskal, which translates to the Great Skull Land in Kasalid. Zorn Uskal is a raised plateau at the northern tip of the Darklands. At the very northern tip of Zorn Uskal itself is Usulak, a mighty Dawi-Zharr fortress. Usulak might be the oldest Dawi-Zharr fortress and is certainly one of the most important. Usulak is a crucial port for the Dawi-Zharr, allowing for trade and slave expeditions to be launched northward into the Sea of Chaos. The majority of the Dawi-Zharr fleet is docked deep inside Sarnagarund, but thanks to the underground canal between the two cities, the Dawi-Zharr fleet can easily launch from Usulak. They say that the worst criminals of the Dawi-Zharr, Oathbreakers, are sent to the secretive lower levels of Usulak for some mysterious punishment amongst whatever horrors reside there. To the west lies High Pass, a passage through the World's Edge Mountains to Kislev. There is a path leading from High Pass east into the Chaos Waste, known as the Road of Skulls, which serves as a trade route to the east. Now we're getting into an area which is debatable as to whether it's canon or not. The Wheatlands. The Wheatlands and the Farside colonies that were supposedly established there are from some pretty outdated lore. Something rotten in Kislev from the 1st edition RPG, and the Chaos Dwarf 4th edition army book, for example. But it is lore that has not been actively contradicted, even if it hasn't been corroborated either. As far as I'm concerned, it's canon, but make your own call. The Wheatlands is an area on the western fringe of Zorn Uskal that is reportedly fairly fertile. I only know of one map supposedly placing the Wheatlands, which by my estimation would place it somewhere around here. On this land, Kislev had tried to establish multiple colonies known as the Farside colonies, to limited success. Many of these colonies have been abandoned thanks to the frequent Hobgoblin and Kurgan raids. One of these abandoned Wheatland colonies is the town of Chernosavtra. Chernosavtra was founded in 2252 IC and is currently home to a necromancer called Anandil. But more importantly, Chernosavtra is supposedly located on an island in the Zapadreka River. We don't know exactly where this river is, but looking at the official world map, we can see that there's a decent candidate right here. If we place Chernosavtra on this river, then we can get a pretty good picture of the eastern reach of the Farside colonies. Lastly, in Zorn Uskal, we have the Falls of Doom, flowing out of this unnamed lake and representing the natural source of the River Ruin. Below the Zorn Uskal plateau is what we could call the Darklands proper. The land here is covered in ash and dust like you would expect. Near the basin of the plateau lies a Skaven lair by the name of Seepgor, home to the infamous Hellbeast of Seepgor and its owners, Clan Grittis. Next we have what is easily the most distinct feature of the Darklands, Zarduk, also known as the Plains of Zharr. Zarduk is a massive crater left behind from some prehistoric meteor that brought with it untold amounts of minerals. The whole of Zarduk is covered in industry. An unimaginable number of slaves toil and perish here every day. There are thousands of mines, foundries and factories here, hiding in between the pits of tar and rivers of burning oil. Somewhere in Zharr, or perhaps beyond, it's unclear, lies Drognankul, a mighty Dawi-Zharr fortress that Wulfric the Wanderer attacked in order to obtain an artifact called the Smile of Sardis. The Tower of Zharr may also be located somewhere in Zharr, though it is possible that the Tower of Zharr may in fact simply refer to Sarnagarand itself. Again, it's unclear. Speaking of Mingol Sarnagarand, the mighty Ziggurat that functions as the Dawi-Zharr's capital is located on the eastern edge of Zharr, near the base of the mountains of Morn. Mingol Sarnagarand, or sometimes simply Sarnagarand, is a massive obsidian structure consisting of several square steps, each hundreds of feet tall. The Ziggurat has 4 entrances, one to the west into Zharr and another to the east that leads into the mountains of Morn. The roads leading to each of these entrances are paved with gold. The north gate lets in the river Ruin as it flows from the Falls of Doom, and is let out again through the southern gate. Most of the Dawi-Zharr's efforts goes towards fueling the endless industry that happens inside of Sarnagarand, where countless war machines are invented and produced. Sarnagarand is such a massive structure that it effortlessly houses the entire Dawi-Zharr navy within its bowels, ready to sail either towards the Sea of Dread or the Sea of Chaos as the need arises. At the pinnacle of the Ziggurat lies the Temple of Hasut, the major place of worship for the Dawi-Zharr's patron deity, Hasut. Here, bull centaurs sacrifice countless slaves in honor of their god. A bit further east from Sarnagarand, across the river Ruin, lies Gash-Kadrak, or the Vale of Woe. Gash-Kadrak is a quarry where many of the Dawi-Zharr slaves toil away until they die under the watchful gaze of hobgoblin overseers. Gash-Kadrak is also home to the hobgoblin Sneaky Git clan, who often lend their services to the Dawi-Zharr. Let's talk about the river Ruin. The river runs from the Falls of Doom along the eastern length of the Darklands and empties into the Sea of Dread at the Scalded Delta. The river Ruin functions as a natural border between the Darklands and the Mountains of Morn. The river Ruin is said to be extremely polluted by the Dawi-Zharr, rendering all land along the river lifeless. This region over here is known as the Desolation of Drakkenmor. A great battle between Chaos Dwarf and Skaven took place here in 2037 IC, known as the Nightmare of Drakkenmor. The reckless use of magic combined with the warp technology of the Skaven and the daemon weapons of the Dawi-Zharr caused a storm of magic to occur that destroyed both sides and let loose a host of daemons into the world, cursing the place of the battle forever. Both sides claimed victory. Located within the Desolation of Drakkenmor is Knashrak's lair, named so after an orc warlord that was slain by Ungrim Ironfist after he was betrayed by Goldfang Maneater in 2510 IC. The presumably abandoned lair has since been infested with Skaven. It's hard to find info of what exactly Drakkenmor is, but there's actually one source that addresses this. A Chaos Dwarf battle report from White Dwarf 186 called Death in Drakkenmor. In this battle report, they explain that there is a path through the Wall-Edge Mountain that the Dawi-Zharr are using called Drakkenmor Gap. Considering that the Dawi-Zharr force in this battle report was retreating from Stirland towards Sarnagarand, the position seems correct, putting Drakkenmor Gap somewhere around here. Further south, we have the wasteland that makes up the majority of the Darklands. The western part of this wasteland is called the Blasted Waste. The Blasted Waste is an inhospitable, desolate place. The goblin tribes that live here hide in valleys and caves, ready to ambush anyone foolish enough to travel across this sunburnt desert. It was from the Blasted Waste that Grimgor Ironhide and his immortals emerged to bring war upon the old world. To the east, we have another wasteland, known as the Howling Wastes. It's named such because of the strange wind that blows here that carries with it wailing voices of unknown origin. The Dawi-Zharr used the Howling Waste as a testing ground for their explosives, since they are banned to do so in Zharr after a giant rocket called the Hammer of Hasut almost hit Sarnagarand itself. In between these two wastelands are the Gates of Zharr. Not much is known about this place, except that it belongs to the Dawi-Zharr, and that slaves that are sent along the long road between Sarnagarand and the Tower of Gorgoth travels through here. Located within the Howling Waste, near the bank of the River Ruin, is the Dawi-Zharr fortress known as the Demon Stump. In minus 2130 IC, an ogre named Argus Skullcrusher and a bloodthirster named Balthor dueled here. The victorious ogre entombed the demon within the rock pillar. Much later, in 223 IC, The Dawi-Zharr built a fortress there that now preys on caravans heading to and from the Sentinels. The Sentinels is a collection of rock formations shooting abruptly out of the howling waste. The Sentinels are riddled with wind-carved tunnels and provide respite from the unforgiving landscape. This has turned the Sentinels into a center of trade in the Darklands. Any caravans traveling to Indra Cathay along the Silk Road, the Ivory Road, or the Spice Route inevitably passes through the Sentinels. They are currently under the control of Malran Eyebiter and the Eyebiter clan. The Eyebiters are a savvy ogre tribe that makes a fortune off the traders that pass through here. There is a lot of lucrative trade happening in the Sentinels, which has attracted a lot of bottom feeders. The mountains are infested with Noblars that take whatever they can get their hands on. Mount Grimfang juts out of the World Edge Mountains. This hold was once called Mount Silverspear and was probably the easternmost hold of Karazankor. The hold was abandoned in -1367 IC and overrun by greenskins who have held the mountain ever since. The mountain is located at the end of the Silver Road and overlooks the strategically important Dead Rock Gap that a lot of traders have to brave in order to travel the Silk Road. Past Mount Grimfang is the area known as the Wolflands. As the name would suggest, these lands are home to many ferocious wolves. As could be expected, the Wolflands produce a lot of goblin wolf riders, the most famous of which is Gatilla the Hunter. Gatilla's early life was spent hunting gruntelope herds through the Wolflands until he departed for the Badlands. The Skaven of Crookback Mountain scour the Wolflands in search of goblin slaves and valuable meteorite rocks. Crookback Mountain is located within the Wolflands and is the headquarters of Clan Rictus. The mountain was originally settled by night goblins, but was accidentally discovered by the Skaven as they dug eastward. Clan Rictus would eventually manage to clear out the mountain and claim it for themselves. This turned out to be very lucrative for them, since they now extort toll of other Skaven clans that travels into the Darklands. That, coupled with a rich supply of goblin slaves nearby, had made Clan Rictus one of the wealthiest Skaven clans in the whole Under Empire. To the southeast lies Mount Greyhag, a goblin stronghold. In -600 IC, the Greyhag goblins managed to repel an attack by the Strigoi vampire Vorag Bloodytooth and his army of ghouls, apparently killing Vorag in the process. To the east of Greyhag, standing almost in the middle of the Darklands, is the thing that gave it its name, Asgore, or rather, what's left of it. When Asgore erupted, it took most of the mountain with it, leaving a decapitated plateau in its place. The Dawi-Zharr found precious minerals in the remains of Asgore, so they built a great fortress on top of the once mighty volcano. This fortress came to be known as the Tower of Gorgoth. The Tower of Gorgoth is the second greatest Dawi-Zharr fortress outside of Sarnagran itself. The mines in Gorgoth and the surrounding area is where a good portion of the Dawi-Zharr slaves end up, but the rich veins in the mines of Gorgoth are almost completely depleted these days. The most infamous Castilian commander of Gorgoth was Basrak the Cruel, who fought against the Nekaharan Empire at their peak as they tried to expand into the Darklands. There is obviously still volcanic activity around Asgore, spewing sulfur and ash over the land, but the mighty volcano itself seems to lay dormant. To the south, in between the remains of Asgorth and the Ashridge Mountains, lies a region known as the Desolation of Asgorth. The name is apt, as this region seems to have suffered the most from the eruption. The land has been rendered into a labyrinth of sharp rocks, toxic fume vents, and sulfur pits. The Desolation of Asgorth might be the least hospitable region in the whole of the Darklands. Unsurprisingly, there are greenskins living here. To the east we have the Black Fortress, considered the third mightiest of the Dawi-Zharr fortresses. Located on the bank of the River Ruin, the fortress is a grand obsidian black tower seated upon a volcanic plateau. Based on the official art depicting the fortress, it's crowned by a massive bullhead, no doubt in honor of Asut. While there are mines and forges within its steps, the Black Fortress is a military outpost, made to guard the southeastern border of the Dawi-Zharr's domain. The fortress functions as the headquarters of the Legion of Asgore, who are confusingly named after a guy called Asgore, not the volcano. The Legion is where disgraced Dawi-Zharr are sent in order to atone for their slights. Their soldiers sear metal plates to their faces so they may hide their shame. In other words, the Infernal Guard of the Legion are the Dawi-Zharr version of Slayers. With this in mind, the Black Fortress is not unlike the Slayerhold of Kadrak Kadren. Across from the Black Fortress, between the River Ruin and the river that flows through the Noblar country, lies the Flayed Rock, a brutal testament to the Dawi-Zharr's cruelty. After a slave revolt had been put out in the Black Fortress, each and every slave that had risen up to the Dawi-Zharr was skinned alive. They then constructed a metal frame on the opposite side of the river ruin and covered the frame with the stitched together skins as a gruesome reminder to anyone who would challenge them. Enchantments were placed upon the tower to make sure that the skins would not wither away, and it still stands there today. Recently, human chaos worshippers have moved into the tower. The region below the Mountains of Morn and east of the river ruin is known as Noblar Country. Noblar Country is a comparatively lush region filled with green hills where Noblars used to live before the rise of the Dawi-Zharr. The constant slave raids into Noblar Country forced the majority of Noblars to migrate away, mostly northward into the Mountains of Morn, where they became a slave race to the ogres that lived there. Some Noblars still live here, however, and there is at least one Noblar shantytown called Scrap Towers. Some of the Noblars here even trade scrap with the nearby town of Pigbarter. Along the coast on the eastern side of the river ruin, south of Noblar Country, lies the Haunted Forest. Aside from the name, the only thing we know of the Haunted Forest is that in -2300 AC, a series of battles were fought between ogres and beastmen from the Haunted Forest, so we can reasonably assume that there are beastmen within. Here we have two Dawi-Zharr settlements, the Tower of Grief and Darkhold. As you can see, they were marked and named on this map from Tarmacan, the Throne of Chaos, but aside from their names, location, and that they are Dawi-Zharr, we know nothing about them. I bring them up because the Dawi-Zharr don't really have many settlements, so it's worth pointing these out. These are the Ash Ridge Mountains. Most of the Ash Ridge mountain range appears to be a series of active volcanoes. Fittingly, magma dragons have been known to live in and around Ash Ridge, most notably Hagdar. Hagdar is one of the mightiest magma dragons to ever live and is an eternal enemy of the Dawi-Zharr after they enslaved him in Gorgoth to use as a living furnace. He escaped and wrought havoc within Gorgoth before retreating to his lair beneath Ash Ridge. The Dawi-Zharr tread lightly around the mountains so as not to arouse the dragon's wrath again. Below Ash Ridge is the Plain of Bones, a descriptive name. The Plain of Bones is a dragon graveyard. In times of old, when a dragon sensed death, they instinctively made their way to the Plain of Bones to die. Dragons no longer come to the Plain of Bones to die, since necromancers and vampire lords abuse the site in order to create their infamous zombie dragons. The plain is covered in the bones of once great dragons, and the ground is made out of a multicolored sand, no doubt a result from the dragon's innate magical qualities. Many ghouls live in the plain, which they share with a mighty living dragon called Omdra the Dread, whom the ghouls worship. Dread moths also live here and appear subservient to Omdra. In the eastern part of the Plain of Bones, there is an abandoned structure called the Fortress of Vorag. The fort's master was Vorag Bloodytooth, a Strigoi vampire that had united an army of ghouls, making himself the first ghoul king. Vorag used goblin slaves to construct his fortress. When he and his ghouls attacked the Grey Hag goblins in search for more slaves, he was struck dead by a bolt thrower. After his death, the now leaderless ghouls simply wandered off, completely deserting the fortress. Near the edge of the Strath Nagash, in the shadow of the Broken Teeth Mountains, lies Anarel's tomb. Anarel was a High Elven seafarer that became stranded on the edge of the Darklands. Anarel and his men spent the winter here, starving and under constant attack by goblin raiders. Anarel himself died from one of these attacks and was entombed beneath a great monolith along with an artifact, the magical Navigation Stone. His men decided to take their chances and wandered north into the wasteland, never to be heard from again. In recent times, the Fortress of Dawn has sent an expedition to try and recover Anarel's body and the Navigation Stone. The Dawi-Zharr did not appreciate the attempt and sent their own force to assert their dominion over the Darklands. To the east in the hills beyond the Plain of Bones, there is a mine called Gulaktha. The mine originally belonged to the Dawi-Zharr but was taken over by a Black Orc tribe sometime after it was abandoned by the Dawi-Zharr. Around 2510 IC, Tarmacan's horde cleared out the mine of greenskin squatters as part of his deal with Drasoa and sent the captured survivors northward as slaves. The Scalded Delta is the mouth of the River Ruin. The delta is a dangerous place as the waters are near boiling hot at places, a result from either the Dawi-Zharr's pollution of the river or because of the nearby volcanic activity. Either way, the foul stench of sulfur permeates through the delta. The swampy region above the delta is known as the Dire Bogs, and may be the home of emirs according to this map from Monsters Arcanum. In the Scalded Delta, along the River Ruin, there's a lone human settlement called Pig Barter. Pig Barter sustains itself of the trade that arrives as a result of being the only usable human trade port in the Darklands. The crowded markets there are filled with exotic goods from across the world. The whole settlement is built on stilts, raising it above the toxic waters below. The ground level of Pig Barter is infested by a Nobbler shantytown. The inhabitants of Pig Barter have no problems with killing these pests and have been known to crucify living Nobblers as a warning to other would-be Nobbler thieves. The town is named after the favorite local pastime, pig jousting. The Dragon Isles are not technically part of the Darklands, but let's cover them anyway. The Dragon Isles is an archipelago just off the coast of the Haunted Forest. The lizardmen who live here lost their slan long ago and have since fallen prey to their own feral nature that the slan otherwise keeps in check. In addition, the isles are filled with some of the largest and most ferocious reptiles in the world, including great worms, quaddles, and the legendary thunder lizards. The Dragon Isles have an ingrained mystical defense left by the slan, making spellcasting here difficult. Despite all of these obvious dangers, many Chilean adventurers still seek out these islands for the precious stones that can be found here. And that's the Darklands. It's an interesting place with a bunch of interesting stuff to cover if you know where to look. There's a lot more to the place than I covered here, but it's either places with little to no lore or in-depth stories that wouldn't suit an overview video very well, so for now, that's it. If I missed anything major or got something wrong, please do tell me, I would love to know.